And then say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Tim.
How are you?
Okay. The first order of business tonight, today, actually it would be, if we were in England and France, it would be today, June 6th. It commemorates the 73rd year anniversary of D-Day. And, you know, I kind of like to do this on occasion when I can think of it, commemorate some of these days in American history, but this was a day that truly changed the world. And even though we were already in combat in North Africa and so on in the Pacific, but the day they started liberating Europe and the central part of Europe, going on to the beaches and everything, it would be just about at this hour that they would be departing in England. So I'd just like to take a quick moment of silence just to remember that date in history. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we had a very, very busy meeting ahead tonight. We have the minutes to approve. Do you want to do that now, or? Okay.
I think I sent them out. A lot of them are just finance committee attendance stuff.
Okay.
Signature.
Okay. What we got here, just one regular meeting?
Yep.
Yeah. And that would be for the meeting of Monday, April 3rd?
May 3rd, right?
No,
April 3rd.
April.
April 3rd, and then April and
Then
May
we have
3rd.
Wednesday, May 3rd.
Okay, sorry.
Do I have a motion to?
Make a motion to accept the meeting minutes of April 3rd, April 12th, April 26th, and May 3rd. April 12th, 26th, and May 3rd were attending Finance Committee meetings.
Okay. Okay, do I have a second?
What dates were they? Is that finance
Can I look them
committee
over
meeting?
first?
The Finance Committee meeting
If you wanna wait,
minutes
we can.
are April
I just-
12th, April
peek real quick.
26th, and May 3rd. So those minutes are simple and pretty much reference just attending.
So these are just referencing attending, okay. I second the
April-
motion.
So the
Accept
April
those.
3rd is actually
A full selectmen's meeting.
Yeah, the others, I believe, Finance Committee meeting.
Right, they just attended meetings.
Okay. I'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Better hand these back down before.
I'm gonna sign, I assume?
Yep.
Please.
Okay. We have selectmen's reports. We have a meeting coming up later this week with the schools. The board does with coming up on Wednesday, the 7th, the board will be meeting with the school committee and, or I don't know about the school committee, but Superintendent Marshall, and we'll be talking about the budgets, and that's at 6 o'clock.
Mhm.
Okay. I think you let them know that there's a chance that, I know Ocam and Hardwick couple of their members might be with us.
I did let them know, and
Yeah, okay.
Superintendent Marshall replied back asking, just for the details of the meeting. I explained that it is a Barry Selectmen's meeting with Quabbin regarding
Right.
our budget.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's our
Just
meeting, and
for her
if they wanna
preparation,
go,
she
they
wanted
can.
to
It's a
know.
posted meeting, so I guess they can
Mhm.
go. And,
That's gonna occur here or at the school?
Here.
It is gonna be here, okay, because we weren't clarified. I didn't think.
yeah, and I think we need to just kind of follow up what we had last week, you know, trying to come up with, take us into account. And I think if they do, it'll probably help the others too. Okay. Into all business, I guess some of the board members had questions about the policies for use of time off and being out. And I think it was asked, was that, you wanted to discuss that, I think?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just don't think we have it well documented how we would communicate that process, and I just wanted to bring up when the selectman's office, as well as maybe the treasurer collector's office, if there's gonna be a scheduled time off, this doesn't mean sick time or emergencies are unknown, that causes pretty much all the personnel not to be available on a day and the office will be shut down. I just think maybe a week's notice might be good, so we can then take the time to advertise it, put it on the town website, things like that, just so people know that this office will be closed on this day because personnel are either on vacation or in training, or the myriad of things that are truly acceptable. It's just giving notice so somebody doesn't show up thinking they could do business that day because they just, in the last 24 or 48 hours, hadn't checked all of these potential places to find out if you're closing for some reason. And so that was really what the gist of this was just to figure out that process and whether we, the select board, actually have a say in whether they can shut an office or not, or when they can shut an office down, or is it strictly up to the town administrator or the various department heads. I don't think it's defined pretty much anywhere in any of our policies. There may be a practice in place, but because of that, I just thought it'd be worth bringing up, so it's not a question later on, well, what is this? Who can and when and why, and what role do we play or not? Because there may be times where we're gonna get questions and we're not gonna have answers if we don't have something to point to.
If a policy doesn't exist, I think it should. I think that any practice of taking time off should be distributed uniformly for all the employees in the building. I would assume each of the department heads, such as fire, police, and DPW, run their employees and I would expect have similar requirements. And maybe a good place to start if you want to look at a policy would be discuss, not so much fire, it's volunteer, but police and DPW, and see what sort of notice they ask for time off. I think that's some reasonable expectation is, I think, deserved and warranted, especially it's a public building, we owe the public use of the building.
Our personnel policy actually does not set a timeline. It just identifies that approval needs to be received from your department head. And the town administrator was identified in the contract that they would request their time off from the Board of Selectmen.
In verbal or in writing, does it stipulate that?
The contract specifically states the town administrator would request their time off. At least Heather's contract said that. I don't recall if we rolled that into Phil's or not, because we weren't looking at a lot of accrued time off he was gonna get. He was gonna get some, obviously, but I think when we wrote his contract, we weren't all caught up in every little detail of that clause.
I think typically when businesses of any type do that, they make sure you rotate things. So like, for example, on Christmas, we'd be closed on Christmas, don't get me wrong, but an example, some businesses that are open, they don't let everyone have the same day off. You know, you have to rotate schedules and give different people different times when they want long weekends or You know, if everybody wanted a long weekend for Memorial Day weekend, we couldn't just have everybody disappear. And sometimes policies are made that, and this happened in the military when I was in it, working at Fort Devens, if you didn't show up for work, took a sick day right before a long weekend, you weren't paid the holidays off. Simple procedures to make sure that people get approved ahead of time.
If I could comment.
Absolutely.
So
Sorry.
I think
That's
it's
okay.
kind of a chain of command, where you have departments, some departments have one employee, they have no department head. You have other departments that have many employees with a department head. So, not policy, but the procedure or practice has been, if you work under a department head, you report to the department head. The department heads are all supposed to report to the town administrator with their days off, sick days, vacation time, so on and so forth. So I think that's the procedure, because if, somebody in the DPW wanted to attend a training, or all the DPW was attending a safety training, I don't think necessarily they would report to the selectmen to say they were gonna be out, but if there was a question, you would go to the department head and say, hey, blah, blah, blah. So the department head would be the point of contact, I think, for any departments that had employees. And the department heads would report for their time to the town administrator.
I agree. The bigger thing I'm looking at is for any office that has kind of like public hours, where people are submitting applications or paying fees.
Well, I think
Those offices, those departments should make some effort to keep those offices open as often as possible.
I think every office has office hours. Every department has
The
office
town
hours.
accountant doesn't.
Well, she doesn't interact with the public, though.
Well, that was my point, but she's her own, like you're saying, an individual, that's one department.
Yeah.
So those offices wouldn't necessarily apply, but like the collector's office, the building department.
Strong selectmen appointed, and it would look like it ties into that.
So my comment really is, it's more about trying to schedule the people's time off when possible to keep the hours open as much as possible, because we're only open 4 days a week as it is. And sometimes on certain weeks, if we close for a day, a certain office, that's only 3 days, and that can really affect somebody's timing if they don't see it coming. And so it's more to that effect of, how do we schedule it, and when we do have to shut an office down, how can we do it and give reasonable amount of time to advertise to the public that we're not gonna be open on this day? And I'm looking more just to see how we can put that into a nice little, again, it doesn't have to be crazy, but if you require a 1 week notice for vacation or paid time off that isn't otherwise regulated, like sick time, you just call in, maybe personal time, we agree, you can just call in, or you at least give 24-hour notice. But vacation time, a lot of times, it's, you gotta give me a week's notice, so I can schedule my department needs as needed. And that week notice should allow us then to advertise a week's notice or close to it, to say our office is gonna be closed. And generally, there shouldn't be any reason why we can't go ahead and close it, as long as we can give notice to the public, and we're not doing it like every week for some reason, which I don't see happening. But you understand my point is, I don't want it to be a pattern where we're really only opening an office for 3 days a week because of some time off thing.
That could happen, though. If you have someone that's a single person office, and they have 3 weeks vacation, and they choose to use 1 day every week as a vacation day for however many weeks until their vacation time's gone.
Do we have any one-person departments that you're the only person in the senior center?
Yeah, you have a lot of those.
Well, then you can't take time off. A whole bunch of half days.
No, but-
Hey,
No.
I don't.
But I think that's
I'm joking,
exactly,
Les.
He
I
does a great
am.
job.
that's
He does-
exactly the reason
he does
to
a
ask
great
for a
job.
week's notice, is because if they're planning to take if let's say he wants to take every Wednesday off, we could arrange someone to be there on Wednesdays to keep it open. That's why we need the advance
Or
notice.
maybe another thing
And-
is,
And to
if you're
clarify
not,
that, personal days, they don't need any notice
Yeah.
of personal days. That's
Mr.
exactly
Chairman,
what
can
they're
I
for.
address that since I take very little time off, as the administrator knows, but if I'm going to be out of the office for training or for a doctor's appointment or whatever it might be, I inform the administrator as soon as I know I'm not going to be in the office. 9 times out of 10, I have volunteers who can keep the building open while I'm not there. I've yet to come into a situation where that's not the case, but if that were to be the case, I would talk to the administrator about how we were gonna handle it. I wouldn't just go.
And that's generally what I'm saying, is taking that practice and just putting it into some type of policy
It's
where
always been, we've
if
always
you-
told
if
the
you-
administrator.
can't keep the
That's an
office
exception.
open or can't, then I was just asking then, how much time can we allow outside of the unexpected? Like I said, there's always something comes up and I can't be in tomorrow or the next day or, but if it's a vacation, or you just say, you know what, I've got a vacation and I'm gonna work 3-day weeks for the next month because I've earned it. And yes, you have, you know,
That's a good
then we just make the notice. If you don't have volunteers to keep open or similar, then we just post it on the door of the senior center and whatever Facebook or whatever other method you would get the word out. And then we work it. And that was more why I was bringing this up, was just that. Like, how do we take an internal thing that normally is just considered like a business practice and then make it work also for the public that may not know where to look or know how to know if you're gonna be closed, and then they show up at lunchtime and they can't do what they thought they had to do that day for their own personal business, and they gotta come back the next day and do it again. And I'm just trying to figure out how we can work that out. It's not that it happens all the time or has happened a lot recently, it was just, I
think
felt
we
that
could-
there was a hole in the policy.
So I think we could definitely establish a procedure. Is it more of a guideline, because obviously it's gonna come up to the department heads and their discretion. But if we have a general guideline to practice that we'd expect everyone to follow, we'll get our week's notice, we can make sure shifts are covered, buildings stay open. There's always gonna be something that comes up, and that's where it falls under the department head to use their discretion on something outside the norm. But I would think expecting a week's notice is reasonable. And once again, we've talked before, and this touches on what our rights are as a selectman. And I think the personnel procedures and policies are ours to implement. We're not talking about changing bylaws, we're talking about policies and procedures for the town employees to follow, to try to keep it uniform. I've had complaints from different people in town about different times, so-and-so takes time off or gets privileges for something and they don't. And it trying to make things seem more equal across the board, I think a procedure or policy is a wise thing to do. I don't think it'll change
Charlie?
anyone's time off.
Bill?
Well, quite frankly, I'm not really sure a policy is required. The two instances that both Faye and I were out were kind of anomalies. I think we're conscious of keeping the office open. It just happened that there were two events those 2 days that required us to be out of the office. And I think generally people of responsible positions as department heads, know that the office needs to be open. So to put a policy in place, I'm not sure is really necessary. But, it's your decision.
We didn't have the opportunity in that case to attempt to keep the office of the building open. We didn't have any opportunity to try to field phone calls or to notify public that they could contact us by email, divert something to the police department if they wanted to forward a message. We were given no opportunity to forward any of the information. And it's a rare exception. We just like to make sure we close that gap where it doesn't happen. I'm sure Faye knew for that meeting, plenty of time out, that we would have had time. She didn't think of us, I'm sure in the past it hasn't been a procedure, and there's no reason to have had it before. But if we'd like the opportunity to try to keep the office open, it'd just be nice to have that notice. And I don't think there's anything wrong with setting up a procedure she'd still come to you and say, I want to go to this seminar, and you'd still say, sure, go to the seminar. It's not going to change the practice, but it's going to make sure we have some notice ahead of time and a chance to try to make sure the office stays open.
But I think the problem you would run into is, do you plan on cross-training people? I'm really kind of unclear, like, what you mean by trying to keep the office open.
Well,
To receive an application and hand it to you the next day. We could direct someone to go down to, if the police department ends up being the town collector or whatever open office that window becomes, we could say, please submit applications or other things where you're just submitting, you're not asking, here, could you give this to Selectmen's office or the town administrator's office when they're open tomorrow? They have a place to do it, just goes into a folder, No questions asked, and then the next day they hand it over to you.
I
That,
mean,
not
in the-
cross-training so much as just,
In the case of our department, the Selectmen's department, we have a mailbox outside of our office that's, lock and key, that's for our department only. I believe the town clerk has one, the tax collector has one on the external of the building.
if someone feels like it's a timestamp sensitive, they want someone that can stamp it saying received, not if you're out on a Thursday, wait till Monday to say you received it.
But we could
Maybe
have-
that matters to
I would
them.
like
We
to
could
just
have
make a
this to-
recommendation that maybe the select board should speak with some of the department heads.
Mhm.
Because you may be thinking it may work in the situation for the Board of Selectmen's department, but it may not work in other departments. And the second recommendation I would have is, if it's something of, setting up notification for vacation time, you may wanna consult with Labor Council, and talk
We're
about.
going through that right now, actually, during negotiations, so
And
that's
talk to
already
him,
under
the personnel
discussion.
policy, you could possibly make something in there regarding the vacation time solely, saying, vacation time must be scheduled with 1 week notification or what have you, but I would just say maybe consult with Labor
Well, typically
Council.
vacations in every place, when I've actually worked for somebody else, I don't tell them when I'm taking my vacation, I put in a request to have that time off. And that, I think, is more what we're talking about. It's a normal procedure for any business to have the employees request, they have their time to use, but you request your time off. You don't necessarily tell the employer, I'm just not taking, this is when I wanna go, and I'm gonna take these days. It never, in me, and that I've seen in the real world, works that way. That's, you put your request in, and we're asking for the request to be at least a week before the day off, so they would have time to adjust, and I don't see any problems. We'd certainly, before anything was implemented, talk to Labor Council, and certainly the department heads. But I can't imagine that they wouldn't welcome something in documentation that gives them the ability to say, I really need you that week. I already get 2 guys off, I can't lose a third, or who knows? There are critical functions, and you could say the DPW went to, we're plowing. We couldn't afford to have 3 guys say, you know what, we're all taking this week off because we're going on a cruise together. We know there's a big snowstorm coming. That would be an unwise time to let a group of employees from a department all leave at the same time.
I would speak with Labor Council.
We will, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think we probably want to look at least I wanted to, maybe once we get caught up on the budgets and stuff, we need to go through and update our personnel bylaws anyway. They need,
Mhm.
Policy, you mean?
yeah, personnel
Policies, not the
policy,
bylaws.
excuse me. Yeah, we need to go through and update it. I've just noticed a few things in there that just, for one reason or another, just need to be upgraded. Some are, because certain laws have changed, others are, that when it was put in, it's, it just needs, not probably working quite as well as some had thought at the time, or it needs to be adjusted. So I think we're about at that point anyway, and I don't know if it needs to be a policy, but a procedure where you just fill out a little form and just say, whatever, I'm gonna take, I'd like these days off, and I want to apply this amount of time, vacation time or whatever, and go from there. Unless you're Lester and we just took yours away, so.
Could I just add that, for
I'll
those of
teach
us
you
who
for
are-
coming.
I'm representing all my brethren here tonight. For those of us who are one-person departments or close to it, if there could be some arrangement, if we wake up in the morning and don't feel well, we obviously haven't had time to request the time off in advance.
I think it was just vacation time.
Right, we're not talking about sick and personal days are completely different.
Secondary to
No, no.
that, we have a situation where this building isn't open during one business day of the week. And I am, Jason is, the library is, so we hear a lot about they can't do business here on Friday. And if you're going to address the whole issue, I think that's part of the whole issue.
Yep, I would say so. Seems like I've heard something about that, but,
I think the DPW is only open 4 days right now, too.
Yeah, I'm-
Water and sewer are year-round, 5-day operations.
I know I'm open 5 days, the
My
library's open
understanding.
5 days, 6 or 7 days, it isn't the same, it isn't consistent. And
yep, Jim?
kudos
Yeah, I know I'm late coming in, I just stepped in the middle of this, but I think a lot of the policies were changed back in the sixties and seventies where, because at one time we was taking, the highways closed down, everybody took the same weeks off. We changed it, I wanna say in the middle sixties, early seventies, where everybody had to take a separate week.
Yeah.
And so everybody was always there. I think that's, you can look back in the set records of the seventies up until this period of time. So back then it was, years ago, the whole week in July, it was closed down for the whole week.
Some companies still do that. I
They
know,
still do. I know Heels, when I was working back years ago, Allen closed down for 2 or 3 weeks during the summer.
They have retool and whatever, and everyone
Yeah.
has 2 weeks vacation, it's the same 2 weeks.
Yeah, but as I say, as the years went along, we changed it when we got unionized,
Right.
where it was always pretty much full crew on the highway, so I'm just saying what they were back years ago. So I was like,
Okay.
I just wanted to throw one thing out there, because we've also referenced, a lot of times, we keep referencing the personnel policy, but I think part of this equation was more of an administrative policy, like a finance and administration policy, where we are actually talking about how we would let the public know if we're gonna be closed, things like that. That's not a personnel issue, that's an administration. And so we would have to look at that, because we don't actually have a lot of those that aren't strictly about the operations to do your job relating to paperwork processing, submittals between departments, things like that. There's not a lot in here that talks about how we interact with the town. And how, so I think it's something we might wanna review again, and we may need to add another paragraph at some point. And I'm not saying it's gonna happen overnight, it's gonna be a building process. Only because it just really allows, again, as Greg mentioned earlier, it's a level playing field. If you've got the policy that says this is how we will interact with the public in certain regards, it's just consistent. People can go to it and say, my understanding was this is how it works, and we can work through that. But if we don't have something, it becomes very subjective and it can create discord. And I'd just rather see something and try to work through it now, and then hopefully later alleviate some of that stuff, because we actually have something that at least the board agreed should be in place. I got nothing more on that unless you want to determine, do any of us want to start drafting anything, create outlines, work towards a goal on this?
I agree with Charlie as to I'd like to see this fiscal year set up for next year before we get into these other issues. We have time for this, it's not an urgent rush. I'd like to see this revisited perhaps in July, and then we can decide on the course of, I'd rather think about the process than to really start working on it yet.
Okay.
You know, we're still talking budgets with people and other things, I don't wanna start personnel issues now. I
Understood.
wanna do it, but I'd like to do it later.
Sounds good to me.
Matt?
Jim?
Yeah, just like maybe what Matt just said, that maybe also it might be a good idea to try to get the personnel board back in operation that they had years ago. And set up a committee with them to help you out on that. That may be helpful to you, so that would be just one more thing you could throw in there.
Could I say
Okay.
something about that,
Yeah,
Charlie?
Matt?
My understanding, and I wasn't directly involved, but this is what I've been told, is one of the reasons the town moved away from a personnel board is there was an attempt to contact the board for a series of months, and you could not get a quorum to answer the call. So what I would ask is, if this board thinks it's a good idea, would we like to hear people somehow tell us, whether it's put in applications or just put your name on a list of, I'm willing to potentially hold a position on that board, and see what that true interest is to have a personnel board that might not be just department heads. I'm not saying we would know, but if there's a public group that would want to be a part of it,
Would this
I've heard this
require-
before, but I would like to know, do we actually have the interest that's more than just, it sounds great, but nobody wants to put in the commitment to be a part of that? And I understand it's a commitment. I'm not knocking anybody that says, I would love to have it, but I can't do it. I understand.
Yep.
But I don't want to start moving or talking like we want to go there and find out nobody still wants to do it. So I think that was the biggest difficulty we had when the town decided to move to the personnel policy.
It
Was
may
because of
be
that.
an issue of having a larger pool to draw from. For example, if the board needed a 5-person quorum to make a vote, you could still have alternates that in the case of someone that absent count within the quorum. So you could have 11 or 12 people, where 5 are the normal
Yeah,
votes, and you could have alternates that could fill in, and that might make it easier for them to meet. If we had a larger board and, 5 voting or deliberating spots maybe, with alternates to fill in. But that structure could be determined later. I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
the board has to go as a bylaw, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, we-
Sorry?
Wouldn't there have to be a bylaw for the
What
town?
We could just write it into the personnel policy.
Yes, it does.
I'm
Because
sorry?
it was voted to abolish, it has to
Yeah,
be voted.
It would have to be
created.
voted back in by the town to have it, I think.
I
No.
believe so, it was voted
We
out.
could write
by-
it into the personnel policy we were voted to allow. And the next select board
Well, the
could
per-
write it out if they
The
wanted.
personnel policy was voted out, I'm sorry, the personnel bylaw was voted out, I'm not so sure about the board
Yeah, I
itself.
don't know, I'd have to look into that one. Kathy?
I just want to know, a department head cannot be on the personnel board, can they?
We
I
could
wouldn't
make
think so.
all of the department heads the personnel board, so they all
If they-
would, each one would recuse themselves if it is in regard to their department.
Okay.
But it makes it so that they all have to be familiar with the personnel policy, and they all have to answer to each other, and sometimes that's a good thing. I'm not saying it is, but, and there's arguments, so don't get me wrong, I'm not standing on anything here, I've heard both sides, so I just don't wanna,
I think typically they're not,
Yeah,
department
typically
heads.
they aren't.
I think it would be, I would like to see enough public interest to have it. I would like to see a citizens board take an outside perspective and I think unbiasedly listen to any issues that come up. I would like to see the board back.
Okay.
But the interest is the issue. It has to be back, it has to be restructured in a meaningful manner so that they can assure a quorum to get their business
Yeah.
done.
Well, why don't you guys
Yeah.
solicit comments from the public if there's interest?
well, that's what my general question was.
Right. That's
So
what I was saying.
we're asking the public, if you actually think you would be interested in being part of this board, please contact the town administrator's office so we can start getting an idea of the true numbers that would be willing to commit some time and be a part of that board.
Or any of our town emails.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah, you could
Feel
send it
free
to
to
any of the town emails on
it
that.
would be part of whatever
Website.
we come up with the policies and stuff we can work. It'd be a nice job for the new administrator. We can start assigning work like we did with the.
Once again, after the budget, I'd like to get into that more, but I
Yeah, but
definitely
we
want
can
to get
just
into that.
assign it, we did it to the
Yeah.
police chief, we assigned him to committees and everything else. He was in.
I'm sure he's very
They
pleased
weren't
with that.
on and. By the way, did you know you got appointed to this? So-
9 o'clock.
But I think it is a
Completion
summer
of
and fall
stuff goes
project.
along.
Probably fall,
What?
probably fall, we'll see.
Well, we'll see. It'll
We'll
take
see what
a
we get
while.
into before then, but we need to
Yeah,
start looking
yeah.
at it and decide.
Okay.
Charlie, just a question, we have a couple people in the audience here that are here to discuss things, could we
Yep.
move some things around?
Yep,
Do you mind if I make a recommendation?
yeah, that's fine.
Um,
Phil, you had the whole street?
Well,
Yes, we have Homie Tron here from CMRPC, she's a planner.
Okay. We can take that up.
sure.
Come right up, come on up.
Thank you.
It's the hot seat here.
Sorry, Dan couldn't be here today, he's out sick, so he's our transportation
Hi.
planner.
I'm John Jay.
Well, I'm Jan, nice to meet you.
Matt Urban.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Greg O'Sullivan.
Nice to meet you.
Have a
So-
seat, be comfortable.
Thank you. So like I said, Dan is out sick and I'm the community development planner, so I'll do my best to answer transportation questions as best I can.
Let me also say that Homie and Dan met with the planning board 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they endorsed the plan. We thought it should be presented to the select board, and I just put something in your packet
Mhm.
a week or 2 ago, so you have a chance to look at it before the meeting tonight.
Yep.
This is Just a quick refresher on the program itself and what we've done so far. Thank you. You're welcome.
Did you have an extra one of those?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm not sure if I have enough, but I'd be happy to make more copies if more people want, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's extras if somebody wants.
So, hold on one second. So we're here today to talk about the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan. We're currently in the Phase 2 portion of the overall Complete Streets program. There are 3 phases. Tier 1 was the Complete Streets policy, which the town adopted last spring. And so now we're moving into Phase 2, which involves the sidewalk data collection as well as the prioritization of projects that we would want to put funding towards. Just to give you a brief overview of our field work out here, we started data collection in January 2017. That included collecting data on sidewalks, which includes grading the conditions of them on a scale of excellent, fair, poor, excellent, fair, good, and poor. So what we did was we looked at the sidewalk network and we looked at where the gaps were, and after we graded the sidewalks, we came back to the town and we had a discussion about where we saw those gaps, where we thought adding in sidewalks would best fill up the existing sidewalk network. So, and we also looked at the ADA ramps and we graded those as well, just looking at which ones are compliant and where ramps are necessary. And in doing data collection, we focused primarily in the town center area as well as Southbury. Those were where most of the sidewalks we saw. And so today, after we met with the planning board a few weeks ago, we brought a list of about 15 projects and just had some feedback from the public in terms of what projects they thought should stay on the list, which projects could be shifted around a little bit. And when you look at the ranking of projects, the ranking doesn't necessarily matter. It's as long as it's on the list, it tells MassDOT that those
Thank
projects.
goodness, I was gonna say, I'll never read that.
We pass those around for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have some extras for you folks, you just have it right over here. So today we're here, just really an open discussion on the list of projects Phil helped us come up with, and just to get your feedback on the project descriptions. Our last step is to work with the DPW to get the total project costs. And these are estimated costs, and as well as the project timelines.
Could I get one of those too?
Yes. There you go. You're welcome. So I brought a map here. We just mapped out the proposed projects in purple. These are 2 proposed bike lanes or bike shoulders. And these 2 smaller maps just show the data collection that we did and the conditions of the sidewalks. So if there's anything that jumps out at you, please let me know. But if you'd like, we can quickly go through the list. I'm not sure what's best. You know, just look at it for a little bit.
Tim?
Are these funded by the government, or does this require participation from the individual towns?
So this is funded through MassDOT's Complete Streets program, and there's a cap of $400,000 per year for the town. And each construction cycle, a town can do up to 5 projects. So we'd be putting in an application. The table itself is the application. So once we fill in the project costs, final project costs and the project timelines, we send it over to MassDOT, and then they'll review it for completeness and get back to the town to cut the check and to grant the funding to the town to do these projects themselves.
I thought that design costs were payable by the town, though. This would be the town's finances, but the construction cost itself is free to the town. Is that correct?
Yes, so this would cover the construction costs. I can look into whether or not this also covers design costs, but I'm not too sure about that. If there's interest, I can definitely look into that for you.
You would want to know that. because-
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind that the town's contract with MassDOT ends, I believe, June 30th. So we would have to submit the final, the draft plan to MassDOT before June 30th. And then they'll come back with comments or edits, we'll address those. But the sooner we can get the finalized project costs and the project timelines onto this sheet, we can send it over to MassDOT and then incorporate any changes or feedback afterwards.
Are you getting comments from DPW?
Not yet. They came back to me with some estimated project costs, and we did some calculations to come up with these numbers. But I'm hoping, if there's any feedback we can incorporate tonight, I'll send it over to DPW tomorrow.
Now, what are the red highlighted sections for?
So the red, those are just our estimates based on federal highway manuals that we had of different bike lanes and hawk beacons and stuff like that. So we just estimated those on an average cost. But my plan was to give this to Jason so that he could take another look at them and confirm that he's comfortable with those.
And the other costs are pretty rigid.
Yeah, those other costs were based on Jason had sent me an estimate of sidewalks, of the cost to repair a sidewalk per foot, of a new sidewalk, and the cost to repair an existing sidewalk per foot. So we plugged those into the length of the project itself and did a little bit of math.
So the idea would be to go down this list and try to pick $400,000 of work for this year?
Well,
Is that
well,
accurate?
Yeah, well, right now, we're just more so looking to get feedback on the projects themselves, and if there's anything that you think should be shifted around or even added. But the estimates themselves are just really bare bones estimate. They don't have to be exact at this point, because DOT understands down the line during phase 3, they'll likely change depending on, TIP projects or grants that come in, things like that.
And your estimates are strictly for the construction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Looks like we could make it through just about item 10 on 400,000.
I should clarify, this is based on a 5-year plan, so all of this doesn't have to add up to $400,000. The town would get up to $400,000 per year to work on the projects on this list. So if there's more projects you'd want to add to it, I would recommend having it on the list. It's better than not having it at all, so that's why you can't address it down the line.
Okay. But to get the funding, if I'm correct, we have to have a complete design to support the actual approval from Mass DOT for the Tier 3 funding.
I believe so, but I will double check the design portion, because there was a question that came up whether funding could cover engineering and design, but I'd like to double check that
Yeah.
first before, but I believe so.
These
Okay.
estimates are just under $1.2 million in total, so theoretically, it could be done in 3 years.
Yeah.
But that'd be maxing out the capability. 5 years probably a good stretch for it. So the purple is supposed to be sidewalks, you said?
Yep, so the purple is all
Or
our.
is it all combined, the sidewalk and the bike lane and?
Yep, so, the proposed bike lanes we have down on, Summer Street connecting to the town common, and as well as on South Street, connecting it to the schools and the post office and the public safety complex. And all this other purple here are proposed, either new sidewalks or sidewalk rehab.
So we're looking at James Street up for the proposal, and the dark purple is for an alternate proposal?
No, so all the dark purple are all the proposals. These little bike lanes here just indicate where the proposed bike lanes would fall.
I'm happy to see that's off of 122.
Yeah, that was a change that came out of the planning board meeting.
Right, that's-
Originally, we just had a sidewalk, and then, after much discussion, we shifted over to 122 for the bike lane, because it seemed more, used in that way.
And that would also connect us getting close to the Felton Field area. We might want to think about doing something to continue that way. Maybe even, I don't know, everyone hates to hear about lights in town, but some safe place to cross 122 from James across to Lower James could get people down towards Felton Field, where there's more activities constantly. Whether it's baseball or tennis or horse shows and things. I'd like to see it continue down to the Felton Field area. I don't know your thoughts. Did you look down at Felton Field where the Little League fields are down there and the horse riding rings and such?
Is that the Berry Plains?
No,
No.
if you continued from James Street where the bike path stops, directly across 122 is Lower James Street, and that'll go onto Colebrook Road.
Okay.
And on Colebrook Road, just up on the right-hand side, we have town fields, Little League fields, softball fields, tennis courts, and fairgrounds.
Okay. Yeah, I would
Be
say that's a really good project.
great to see someplace to get it down. There's a lot of activity there, especially during the summer.
We did look at that several years ago. We had the landscape architecture program from UMass come out and go over that with us.
And it's a lot,
Yeah.
it's.
This is Lower James,
Okay.
right here. That brings it down to Valley. And he's just saying right here is Felton Field.
Gotcha.
So carrying to get the, are you speaking specifically of the bike lane or just the sidewalks and all
I would
that?
like to see a sidewalk down there.
Because they got sidewalk on Lower James,
But down.
but it stops at Old Colebrook. It
I'd like
doesn't
to
carry
see it-
across.
I'd like to see it stretch across to the, that's a big area for kids. And if there's any place we should have, a bike lane, and it's not highly developed beside the road. If we had to widen a little bit there, we could.
That's right, right?
No, I
I'm
have
not
a-
completely misleading her there. Are we
Is-
reading that map right? Felton Field is generally
free to
right where
mark
she
it.
just
Yeah.
marked.
Yeah.
No,
Just
that's,
about.
that's what we're talking about. is-
Okay.
And but that'll, Lower James, it's one way right now, which makes it easy to put, sidewalk or bike path. And it goes down to a four-way stop sign at the bottom of the hill. There's a three-way stop now, might be. Three-way now?
You can't go down up James Street, you can only come up it, on over James Street.
Right, so three-way stop, but it's,
Huh?
and there's a lot,
You can't go
Little
down.
League, from now through the summer, Little League is there
Mm-hmm.
with the younger kids all the time, and parents drop them off, and, there's lots of kids that like to walk back to the stores from there and things.
Can you ask Mr. Sullivan also to speak up, please?
I was just saying that there's a lot of use of those fields for Little League and softball,
Yeah.
baseball and softball, and a lot of kids in that area. It'd be nice to have the sidewalk, at least a sidewalk, if not a bike lane, down that stretch.
Okay. I have a question. If we were to be applying for some block grant work with redesigned, municipal water and sewer pipes down in this area here, would some of these proposals enhance our application for going for the block grant, or would they?
I would say so, particularly in that area because it's an environmental justice population. It's a lower income population, so I
Right.
think that would really speak to the need and the surrounding
Okay, 'cause
community.
it's kind of a three-phase project, but
Right.
we're, hopefully.
And I haven't paid attention to the streets up on that end, but on the South Berry, there's the fields up there, the soccer fields and playgrounds up on
High Plains.
High Plains up in School Street north, south, right, off of Peach Street.
Yes.
And I don't know I don't recall if the sidewalks, I don't think we have sidewalks up
Yeah,
there.
there,
But there's,
Partially,
it's
no.
another playground area and, well, maybe in that area, but not necessarily all the way up to it from anywhere.
okay, that's
Because
good.
we're
to know.
coming down to South Barry area here, and up here off of Peach, right?
Yep.
Back off of Peach further, there's playgrounds up
Mhm.
here. So it wouldn't be a big stretch to come down off of there, up High Street, or Peaches on the other end, but there's a store down this end.
Right.
Something in this backside, you'd have to, I don't know if we can go back.
Well,
and
we
look
have
at
the
it if we're-
sidewalks, but I think originally the plan was we started to put in water lines in South Barry up the hill. And the idea, this goes quite a ways back, but we had a
Yeah.
block grant for this up to about the end of the main, where most of the houses are on Peach Street. Then we were gonna continue down and up Main Street, and it would finally end up here by the store where the old personnel office was. And that way we could route water both ways. If something were to happen and there was a shut off somewhere, we could push water either way and keep the main village in South Barry and hopefully High Plains on water. Or if we had to shut something off, it would be as small an impact as we could have. That was the goal. And
It would be nice to be able to link South Barry and Barry Commons with the bike path as well, but I just don't know.
yeah, but I was just talking
Unless we're
about.
going all the way by South Street, that's
But when
way
we
off.
do that, when you get the block grant, you get the street repaired completely. And if you notice, that's one of the little benefits of the whole thing. So that's why I was asking, and I don't know what type of and the other question I have is, having been in farming, I don't know if the bike trails and stuff are great, but I don't need back roads. It is a nightmare with farm equipment and bicycles. And if you've ever run down the road with, wide stop, and this is a mess, and it's very problematic. I don't know if we can have suggested bike trails or what, but you get into some real jam-ups out there with these bicyclers that, it can be a rather interesting experience personality-wise. There's some tight fits out there.
Well,
Yeah,